Or Black men studies is just about understanding Black men. But it's important to look for both of them, to look at it the like, oh well, Black men studies is about understanding Black men for the purpose of better understanding African community and family, because the end point cannot just be about um, Black men or African men. It needs to be tied to and that would take a shift in thinking too, because it's easy to say that, okay, you study this gender and then that's empowering an entire nation. Well, the same is true for Black men. It has to be viewed that way first too, that it's important that understanding African men is essential to advancing African families and communities. So two parts to a complementary, indivisible whole, I think, is the connection.
Good, good. Now, I wanted to go back to something we were talking about earlier. This connection of culture that is not bound by geography. Going back, and I know you'll remember this, going back about 20 years when we made our first trip to Ghana, and we sat outside and just kind of watched people of Ghana go by, and the men and the women interacting, and we felt a certain connection because they hung out like we hung out. They interacted like we interacted, and this was kind of showing us our connectivity to each other regardless of our place on the planet. And would you further elaborate on this connectivity between Black men in the diaspora and Black men on the continent?
Yeah, I think that so. Okay, the analogy that I like best is Wade Nobles. And he talks about African people as different branches of a common tree. Or you take Patricia Hill Collins. I think she uses the language of, she describes African people as a heterogeneous collective, meaning that we're all extensions of Africa, but we're also the unique authors and creators of our own identities throughout the globe, the diaspora. So I think when we come together and we start to like being raised in the American context, but being a person of African descent, and then them being in, say, the Nigerian or Ghanaian context, and when we come together, it's inevitable. It highlights the things that wow, that's just like, it's just a natural thing. It's like, wow, that's just like us. And then we can also see the things that are, okay, this is different. So that's why I think travel abroad is so necessary for African people to be able to see those things, because it's not just based on like, okay, the point at which migration or forced migration occurred. Both. We also continue to mutually influence one another because they're listening to our music, and then we're listening to the music that is coming from the African continent, and we're mutually influencing one another in an ongoing basis, not just historically. And yeah, I think that that's what's happening, and it's
so it's like we're having a conversation across the Atlantic.
Yeah, it's constantly
a cultural conversation.
Yeah, constantly taking place, constantly taking place. You have ongoing basis. You have uh, people, African people in the diaspora wanting to connect to Africa, and people in Africa wanting to connect with African American as well on political and cultural levels as well, for different reasons, but for very complementary reasons. And I think that when we come into contact with one another, um, what makes that contact conflictual or harmonious is how understanding we are of one another, you know? And if we can get that before we come, if we can get that in school, then I think that it will affect the our ability to establish like an authentic Pan-Africanism. Yeah.
So how would we exploit this point moving forward? Because this connectivity is we have to not only recognize it, but we have to exploit it. We have to really dig into this connectivity to move forward. What would you think would be the best ways to exploit this connection in order to further strengthen this global African family?
Yeah, I think that so we're already catching kind of a wave right now already. There was the kind of the decade of we're still in it, the decade of the African diaspora right now, according to the UN, the United Nations. So um, then you have naturally, okay, putting COVID aside, what we were seeing was this increased level of migration and increased level of travel, international travel. I mean, this is the most mobile generation that there's ever been. People traveling from one country to another. And what's happened is that you already have things happening. You have people moving from one country to the next in the African diaspora and to the African continent already. You have African people traveling from the continent or from the Caribbean and other places in the diaspora to the American context, and it's having an influence on African culture in the American context. You know, the way we practice Islam, Christianity, uh, family values, etc. That migration is shaping already the institutions we already have. So I think that um, to go back, I think that the implementation of African-centered education early on is going to be something in the long run that 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 makes that happen. That's going to make that happen automatically, I think. And then because we can't rely on that, I think we need to also intentionally, instead of just catching the wave, there's catching the wave and then there's like creating waves. So I think we have to create institutions. And that's why, I think, of course, the best example, right? Best example is Osiri University. I mean, it is that it's kind of the manifestation of what we're talking about, you know? Exactly. This university. And more like it, I think. People were talking at our,